Major Frank Donovan stared at the holographic image of Tartarus as it rotated slowly in the center of the briefing room. The planet looked angry. Swirling red clouds covered most of its surface, with occasional flashes of lightning that seemed to span hundreds of miles. Even as just an image, it made the hairs on his arms stand up. Class 13, Deathworld, said Dr. Elaine Murphy, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and hands that never seemed to stop moving. Only 3 expeditions have ever been sent to worlds of this classification. None returned. Frank looked around the room. 20 alien officers from the Galactic Confederation sat in a semicircle, their faces showing various forms of concern, doubt, and what Frank had learned to recognize as pity. Humans were the newest members of the Confederation, having joined only 15 years ago. Many species still viewed them as primitive. Your mission is simple in concept, continued Dr. Murphy, expanding the hologram to show a crash site on the planet's northern continent. 3 weeks ago, the research vessel Horizon went down with critical data on board. We need that data. What kind of data is worth sending 200 soldiers to a place like this? Frank asked. Admiral Zhen, a Kardashian with translucent blue, skin that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, leaned forward. The Horizon discovered an energy source that could revolutionize space travel, perhaps end our dependence on wormhole gates entirely. Frank nodded. The Confederation controlled all wormhole technology, which was how they maintained their power over the 2,000 member species. If humans got their hands on an alternative, why us? Asked Commander Samuel Baker, the mission overseer. He was an older man with a scar that ran from his right eye to his jaw. There are more advanced species in the Confederation. Dr. Murphy smiled slightly. Because humans are uniquely suited for this environment. Your species evolved on what most Confederation members would consider a mid-level death world. Earth's gravity, radiation levels, predator ecosystems, and atmospheric toxins would kill most species within hours. We're sending you because you might actually survive, Admiral Zhen said bluntly. Frank met the alien's 4 eyes without blinking. We'll do more than survive, Admiral. We'll succeed. The briefing continued for another hour as they discussed landing zones, extraction points, and the limited intelligence they had on Tartarus's ecosystem. The longer they talked, the more Frank realized how little they actually knew. The drones they'd sent had lasted less than 6 hours on the surface. Back in the ship's hangar, 200 members of the 44th Earthborn Rangers prepared their equipment. Frank walked among them, stopping occasionally to check a weapon or offer a word of encouragement. These were Earth's finest soldiers, men and women who had fought in the Mars Rebellion and the Europa Crisis. If anyone could survive Tartarus, it was them. Lieutenant Grace Howard approached him, her combat armor already sealed except for her helmet. She was in her mid-30s with short brown hair and a steady gaze that had kept more than one young recruit in line. "The troops are ready, sir," she said, though I caught Private Cooper throwing up in the bathroom. "First combat drop." Frank nodded. "Keep an eye on him. He's young, but his test scores were off the charts. We might need those brains down there." Grace looked at the dropships, 6 sleek black vessels designed to pierce planetary atmospheres at speeds that would crush most species. "Do you believe what they're saying about this planet?" "I believe we're not getting the full story," Frank replied quietly. "But that's nothing new. We haven't gotten the full story since Earth joined the Confederation." A warning klaxon sounded, signaling 30 minutes until launch. Frank raised his voice to address the assembled Rangers. "Listen up. You all read the briefing packet. Tartarus is classified as a Class 13 death world. The Confederation thinks we're walking into a death trap." He paused, looking at the faces of his soldiers. "But they don't know what we know. Humans didn't become the dominant species on Earth by being easy to kill." A few soldiers laughed, tension breaking slightly. "Our mission is simple. Get to the crash site, secure the data cores, and get to the extraction point. We have supplies for 10 days. The mission timeline is 3. Questions?" Captain Joe Martinez raised his hand. "Sir, what about indigenous life forms?" Preliminary scans show complex ecosystems with predator-prey relationships not unlike Earth's. Everything on this planet has evolved to kill everything else, so standard procedure, if it moves, be ready to shoot it. The soldiers nodded. They had all fought alien life forms before. Some were still having nightmares about the hive minds of Europa. One more thing, Frank added. The Confederation is watching this mission closely. They think we're too primitive to handle their technology, too aggressive to join their political councils, too unpredictable to be trusted. Let's show them exactly how unpredictable humans can be. A cheer went up from the Rangers. As they boarded the dropships, Frank felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came before every mission. Not fear, but anticipation. The aliens couldn't understand it. To them, a Class 13 Deathworld was a nightmare. To humans who had evolved on a planet that had tried to kill them at every turn, it was just another challenge. The dropship vibrated as its engines powered up. Through the viewport, Frank could see Admiral Zhen and the other alien officers watching, from a safe distance. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to what seemed like sadness, as if they were already mourning the humans they had sent to die. Pathfinder 1, you are cleared for launch, came the voice of the ship's AI over the comm system. Frank secured his helmet and felt the reassuring hiss as his suit sealed. Around him, the Rangers did the same, their movements precise and practiced. Rangers, sound off, Frank called. One by one, the squad leaders reported their teams ready. Pathfinder 6, ready, came Grace's steady voice last. Launch in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The dropship shot forward, breaking free from the Valiant's artificial gravity. 5 other ships followed in tight formation. Through the comm system, Frank could hear the excited whoops of some of the younger Rangers. Veterans like Grace remained, silent, saving their energy for what lay ahead. As the dropships approached Tartarus's atmosphere, the vibrations increased. Red light bathed the interior as they began to encounter resistance. Encountering stronger than expected atmospheric turbulence, reported the pilot, her voice tight with concentration. Compensating, Frank watched through the viewport as the first ship hit the upper atmosphere, its heat shield glowing bright orange against the reddish clouds. The other ships followed, spreading out in a standard entry pattern. 2 minutes to landing zone, called the pilot. Frank looked at the faces of his team. Some were praying, others checking their weapons one last time. Private Alan Cooper, barely 22 and on his first mission, was pale but composed now, his earlier nervousness gone. Remember your training, Frank said over the comm. This is why humanity joined the stars. Not to hide among the safe worlds, but to take on the challenges no one else would dare. The dropship shuddered violently as it penetrated deeper into Tartarus's atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. We've got damage to Stabilizer 3, shouted the pilot, and Pathfinder 2 is reporting engine failure. Frank grabbed a handle as the ship lurched sideways. Can they make it to the landing zone? Negative. They're diverting to secondary LZ 7 miles east. Tell them we'll rendezvous as soon as... We're on the ground, Frank ordered. The viewport cleared enough to show the landscape below. It was a vast rocky plain with strange crystal formations jutting up like jagged teeth. In the distance, something that might have been a forest spread across the horizon, though the trees looked more like giant mushrooms than anything that grew on Earth. With a final bone-jarring thud, the dropship touched down on the surface of Tartarus. The ramp lowered, revealing a world bathed in reddish light from twin suns hanging low in the sky. Frank was the first one out, boots crunching on ground that looked like ordinary rock, but felt slightly springy, as if it were partially alive. Atmosphere check, Grace called out, running a scanner over the air. Breathable, Frank confirmed as his suit's external sensors reported back. Barely. High sulfur content, low oxygen. Keep your filters engaged. The Rangers deployed in a defensive perimeter around the ship, weapons ready. The gravity was heavier than Earth's, and Frank could feel the extra strain on his muscles despite his powered armor. In the distance, something howled, a long, wavering cry that sounded like nothing any of them had heard before. Several Rangers turned toward the sound, their weapons tracking the direction. And so it begins. Frank said quietly, taking his first real steps on the surface of Tartarus. Let's move out. The first 6 hours on Tartarus passed without major incident. The Rangers moved in formation across the rocky terrain, their boots leaving prints in the strange, slightly elastic ground. Frank led from the front, with Grace commanding the rear guard. The landscape was alien but eerily familiar, like a twisted version of Earth's Badlands. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Valiant," reported the communications officer, a young woman named Kelly West. She tapped her equipment with a worried frown. It might be the atmosphere or some kind of natural interference. Frank nodded. "Keep trying every 15 minutes, but we continue as planned." The twin suns of Tartarus hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to move slightly, even when the objects creating them didn't. The air smelled of sulfur and something else, something organic and not quite dead. Captain Joe Martinez led the first reconnaissance team, moving 50 yards ahead of the main group. His voice crackled over the comm system. "Major, we're picking up unusual electromagnetic readings about a quarter-mile ahead, and there's something you should see." Frank signaled for the main group to hold position and jogged forward with Grace to join Martinez. As they crested a small ridge, Frank stopped and stared. Rising from the landscape were crystal formations, some as small as a fist, others towering 30 feet high. They glowed with a faint blue light that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" Grace asked, her voice hushed. "No," Frank admitted, "but Dr. Murphy mentioned crystalline structures in the briefing." Second Lieutenant Olivia Wright, the team's geologist, was scanning the crystals with a handheld device. "They're generating energy," she said, her eyes wide with surprise. "And they seem to be communicating with each other." "Communicating?" Frank asked. "The pulses aren't random. There's a pattern, and it changed when we approached." Frank didn't like the sound of that. "Are they dangerous?" "Unknown," Wright replied. "But they're interfering with our communications. That might be why we can't reach the ship." Frank made a quick decision. "We'll skirt around the crystal field. Martinez, take point and find us a path." As they moved away, Frank noticed the crystal pulses becoming faster, more agitated. He couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The Rangers continued their march toward the crash site, now visible on their trackers as a beacon about 8 miles ahead. The terrain grew increasingly difficult. Jagged rocks gave way to deep crevices that forced them to detour, and patches of ground that looked solid would suddenly sink under a soldier's weight. "It's like the whole planet is booby-trapped," muttered Private Cooper, who had taken to the mission with surprising calm after his initial nervousness. Frank was about to respond when a shadow passed overhead, something large and fast-moving. The Rangers dropped into defensive positions instantly, weapons aimed skyward. A creature circled above them, its wingspan at least 30 feet. It looked like a cross between a pterodactyl and a bat, with leathery purple skin and multiple eyes that glowed in the dimming light. "Hold fire unless it attacks," Frank ordered. The last thing they needed was to alert every predator in the area. The flying creature made another pass, lower this time, then moved off toward the crystal field they had avoided. Frank watched it land on one of the larger crystals, folding its wings as it seemed to communicate with the pulsing formation. "Did you see that?" Grace asked, her rifle still trained on the distant creature. "Yeah," Frank said quietly. "I'm starting to think there's a lot more going on this planet than the Confederation told us." As the first day on Tartarus neared its end, the Rangers found a defensible position nestled between 2 rocky outcroppings. The sky had turned a deep crimson as one sun set, while the other lingered on the horizon. "Night cycle begins in approximately 20 minutes, reported Dr. Kyle Richards, the battalion's xenobiologist. "Based on the planetary rotation, we'll have about 4 hours of darkness." Frank organized the watch rotations. "No fires, minimum light. We don't know what hunts here after dark." The Rangers set up their perimeter, deploying sensor drones at regular intervals around the camp. Most soldiers ate their ration packs in silence, too tired to talk after marching in the heavy gravity all day. Private Cooper approached Frank as he was checking his weapon. "Sir, I've been analyzing the data from Lieutenant Wright's crystal readings. he said, holding out a small tablet. Frank took it, scanning the complex patterns on the screen. What am I looking at, Cooper? It's a comparison of the crystal pulses. Before and after we approached them, the patterns didn't just change, they became more complex, almost like... Like what? Cooper hesitated. Like they were discussing us, sir. Frank handed the tablet back, frowning. Keep this between us for now. I don't want to spook the others unless we have concrete evidence. Cooper nodded and moved away, just as Grace joined Frank at the edge of the camp. The Western team made contact. With Pathfinder 2, she reported. They landed safely but encountered some local wildlife. 3 injuries, no fatalities. They're holding position until morning. Good. Tell them to stay put. We'll rendezvous tomorrow. Grace looked out at the darkening landscape. What do you think happened to the crew of the Horizon? The briefing said the ship was intact enough that they should have survived the crash. Frank had been wondering the same thing. I don't know, but we'll find out tomorrow. The last of the sunlight faded, plunging Tartarus into darkness. The crystal fields, in the distance, became more visible now, their blue glow creating eerie shadows across the landscape. Above them, stars appeared, constellations unfamiliar to human eyes. Frank had just closed his eyes when the first scream tore through the night. "Contact East Perimeter," shouted a voice over the comm. Frank was on his feet instantly, weapon ready, running toward the sound with Grace and a squad of Rangers behind him. The scene at the perimeter was chaos. 3 dark shapes moved with impossible speed among the Rangers, their forms barely visible except for glowing yellow eyes. One soldier lay on the ground, his armor torn open across the chest. "Open fire," Frank ordered, and the night erupted, with the sound of pulse rifles. The creatures moved like shadows, seeming to flow around the energy bolts rather than be hit by them. One leaped directly at Frank, and he got his first clear look, a 6-limbed predator with no visible mouth and skin that seemed to absorb light. Frank fired 3 times, center mass. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. Instead, it made a clicking sound that vibrated in Frank's skull like sonar. "They're using echolocation," shouted Dr. Richards from behind the defensive line. "Standard ammunition isn't effective." Grace switched her rifle to explosive rounds. "Try this," she said, firing at the nearest creature. The round detonated on impact, tearing a hole in the predator's side. It screeched, a sound so high-pitched it made Frank's teeth hurt, and retreated into the darkness. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, 7 Rangers were dead, their bodies mangled in ways Frank had never seen before. The creatures had retreated, but Frank knew they would be back. "They were testing us," Grace said as they helped the wounded. "Learning our weaknesses." Dr. Richards was examining tissue samples from one of the creatures, killed during the attack. "Their cellular structure is unlike anything I've ever seen," he said, "almost like it's designed to adapt on contact with new threats." "You mean they're evolving right now?" Frank asked. Richards nodded grimly. "I think so. The next time we see them, our weapons might not work at all." Frank looked out into the darkness surrounding their camp. Somewhere out there, the creatures were watching, learning, adapting. And beyond them, the crystal fields pulsed with increased intensity, as if excited by the violence. "Double the watch," Frank ordered. "And no one goes anywhere alone, not even to take a leak." As the Rangers regrouped, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that the planet itself was studying them, preparing for their next move. This wasn't just a hostile world, it was a predator, and they were the prey. The longest 4 hours of darkness lay ahead. Morning came with a sudden burst of harsh light as both suns rose almost simultaneously. The Rangers had survived the night, though no one had slept much after the attack. They buried their dead in shallow graves, unable to transport the bodies. Frank said a few words over each soldier, keeping it brief. There was no time for proper mourning. "We need to reach the crash site today," Frank told the assembled Rangers. "The longer we stay in one place, the more this planet learns about us." They broke camp quickly and efficiently, leaving few traces of their presence. Frank had ordered the rendezvous with Pathfinder 2's team, adding 16 more Rangers to their group. The others from that dropship had been killed in what there were Commander described as an ambush by the ground itself. As they marched, Dr. Richards approached Frank with his findings from the night before. "I've completed my analysis of the predators," he said, showing Frank a holographic display from his portable lab equipment. "Their cellular structure changes in response to damage. The second and third creatures we encountered were already developing resistance to our weapons." "How is that possible?" Frank asked. "Evolution takes generations." Richards shook his head. "Not here. Something in this environment accelerates adaptation. And there's something else." He pointed to a microscopic structure. "Within the cell, these organisms have trace elements that match the composition of the crystals we found." Frank stopped walking. "You're saying the predators and the crystals are connected?" "I think everything on this planet might be connected, Major. Like one massive organism." Frank pondered this as they continued toward the crash site. The landscape had changed overnight, with new crystal formations sprouting where none had been before. Some rangers reported feeling dizzy when passing too close to the larger crystals. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a massive crater. In the center lay the wreckage of the Horizon, its hull breached in multiple places but largely intact. "Set up a perimeter," Frank ordered. "Martinez, take your team and scout the approach. Wright, get me a geological survey of that crater. I want to know if the ground is stable before we go down there." As the Rangers carried out their orders, Frank studied the crash site through binoculars. Something wasn't right. The ship had obviously crashed with tremendous force, yet the crater seemed too perfect, too symmetrical. "It's like something caught it," Grace said, standing beside him with her own binoculars. "Or something formed around it after impact." Frank nodded. "My thoughts exactly." Martinez's team reported back 20 minutes later. "Approach is clear, sir. No signs of hostile life forms. But we found something strange around the ship's hull." "Define strange, Captain." "The ground around the ship, it's moving, sir. Just slightly. Like breathing." Frank made his decision. "We go in fast and focused. Primary objective is the data cores. Secondary objective is to find out what happened to the crew. We're in and out in 30 minutes. The descent into the crater was tense but uneventful. Frank led the main team while Grace commanded a second group that would circle around to the ship's rear entrance. The ground beneath their feet felt spongier here, almost organic. As they approached the horizon, Frank could see what Martinez had reported. The ground around the ship pulsed subtly, as if alive. More disturbing were the small crystal formations, growing directly on the ship's hull, spreading like glittering fungi. "Breach team, move in," Frank ordered. Specialists quickly cut through the sealed doors of the research vessel. The interior was dark, emergency lighting providing only faint illumination. The air smelled stale but breathable. "Life support systems, still partially functional," reported the tech specialist, Corporal Ben Hall. "But no signs of the crew." Frank led the way through the main corridor toward the bridge. Everything was in surprisingly good order. No signs of panic or struggle. Abandoned coffee cups sat on consoles. A jacket hung neatly on the back of a chair. "It's like they just stepped out for a minute," Grace said over the comm from her position at the ship's engine room. "Check the personal quarters and med bay," Frank ordered another team. "Find out where they went." On the bridge, Frank found the captain's log still active. He played the final entry. A tired-looking woman appeared on screen. "Captain's log, final. Entry. We've been on Tartarus for 2 weeks now. The energy source we discovered, and it's beyond anything we imagined. But it's not what we thought. It's not a resource to be harvested. It's alive. The whole planet is alive and aware. The crystals are part of its nervous system. We've been trying to communicate with it, but I fear our presence is causing it distress. Dr. Patel thinks..." The recording cut off abruptly. "Found the data cores, sir," called Corporal Hall from a nearby console. "They're intact, but, sir, they're covered in crystal growths." Frank moved to examine the cores. Small blue crystals had formed around and within the storage devices, pulsing with the now familiar rhythm he'd seen outside. "Can we extract them?" Hall looked uncertain. "Maybe, but it might damage the data. It's like the crystals have integrated with the system." Frank made a quick decision. Download whatever you can to portable drives. We'll take both if possible. As the tech team worked, Frank received a call from one of the search teams. Sir, we found the crew. At least we think we did. Frank followed the directions to a large storage bay at the rear of the ship. What he saw there stopped him cold. The 20-person crew of the Horizon stood in a circle, perfectly still. But they weren't people anymore. Not entirely. Crystal formations had grown through and around them, connecting them to each other and to the ship itself. Their eyes were open, but unseeing, their skin pale with bluish veins visible beneath. Are they alive? Frank asked Dr. Richards, who was scanning the nearest figure. In a way, Richards replied quietly. Brain activity is present, but altered. Their patterns match the pulses in the crystals. It's like they've been networked into the planet's system. One of the younger Rangers made a sound of disgust and backed away. As he did, all 20 heads turned in unison to look at him. Nobody move, Frank said softly. The crystallized crew members remained still, watching. Then as one, they turned their gaze to Frank. A voice spoke, not from any particular crew member, but seeming to emanate from the crystals themselves. The sound was like multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. You should not be here. Frank kept his weapon lowered but ready. We came for the data from the ship. We don't mean any harm to your world. Deception, the voice said. Your kind always deceives. You do not seek knowledge. You seek weapons. Before Frank could respond, a violent tremor shook the ship. Outside, Rangers were shouting over the comm system. Major, the crater is closing. Grace's voice cut through the chaos. The whole area is shifting. Frank backed toward the exit, keeping his eyes on the crystallized crew. All teams evacuate immediately, grab what you have and move out. As they ran through the corridors of the Horizon, the ship groaned around them. Metal twisted as the structure was compressed by outside forces. Frank reached the exit point just as another violent tremor knocked several Rangers off their feet. Outside was chaos. The crater walls were shifting, closing in like a massive iris. The ground beneath the ship was no longer simply breathing. It was actively moving, lifting the vessel. Run for the ridge, Frank shouted over the comm system. Don't stop for anything. Rangers scrambled up the increasingly steep sides of the crater as the ground continued to shift. 3 soldiers disappeared as the earth opened beneath them. 2 more were crushed when a section of the crater wall collapsed. Frank helped pull Private Cooper up a particularly steep section. Looking back, he saw the Horizon being slowly engulfed by the living ground, crystal formations spreading across, its hull with visible speed. What is happening? Cooper gasped as they ran. The planet is protecting itself, Frank replied, and we just became the enemy. They reached the ridge as the crater closed completely, leaving no sign that a ship had ever crashed there except for a slight mound in the earth covered in pulsing blue crystals. Frank did a quick head count. 143 Rangers remained. They had the data drives at least partially intact. But the cost was mounting, and they were still 3 days from the extraction point. In the distance, the crystal fields had grown larger, spreading in their direction, and beyond them something massive was moving across the landscape, a creature the size of a small mountain heading straight for them. Frank led the remaining Rangers at a quick march away from the crash site, heading toward higher ground to the east. Every few minutes he glanced back at the massive creature following them. It moved slowly but with steady purpose, like a living mountain of flesh and crystal. What is that thing? Asked Private Cooper, who had been assigned to Frank's direct squad after showing his analytical skills. I don't know, Frank admitted, but I don't want to find out up close. They had been out of contact with the Valiant for over 48 hours now. Their planned extraction point was still 2 days' march away, assuming they could maintain their current pace. Frank doubted they could. The Rangers were exhausted, the planet's heavy gravity taking its toll on even their enhanced muscles. Lieutenant, Howard jogged up beside Frank. Sir, Dr. Richards wants to show you something. He's been analyzing the data we recovered. Frank nodded and followed Grace to where Richards had set up his portable lab on a flat rock. The scientist looked up as they approached, his face pale. "Major, I've been reviewing the research logs from the horizon," Richards said, turning his tablet to show Frank. "The energy source they discovered. It's not a physical resource, it's information." Frank frowned. "Explain." "The crystals store and process information like a biological computer, but on a planetary scale. The horizons, scientists believed the entire ecosystem evolved as one interconnected organism, with the crystals serving as its brain. And the crew?" Frank asked. "What happened to them?" Richards hesitated. "According to their logs, they were attempting communication with the planet. They found a way to interface with the crystal network. I think they succeeded, but not in the way they expected. They became part of it." Grace shook her head. "Why would they do that voluntarily?" "The logs suggest they discovered something so important they felt it was worth the risk," Richards replied. "Something about the nature of space-time itself." Frank was about to ask more when the ground beneath them trembled. Not violently like before, but with a subtle rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. "Move out," he ordered. "Everyone stay alert." They continued their march as the day progressed. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, and several rangers showed signs of heat exhaustion despite their environmental suits. Frank called a brief rest in the shadow of a large rock formation. As they rested, Captain Martinez approached with a worried expression. "Sir, we've lost contact with 3rd Squad. They were scouting the western flank." Frank felt a cold weight in his stomach. 3rd Squad had 8 people. "Send Wright and her team to find them, full combat readiness." 20 minutes later, Wright's voice crackled over the comm. "Sir, you need to see this." Frank left Grace, in charge of the main group, and took a small team to Wright's position, about half a mile away. What he found there made his blood run cold. A new crystal formation had erupted from the ground, forming a perfect circle about 30 feet in diameter. Inside the circle stood the 8 members of 3rd Squad, frozen in various poses. Crystals had begun growing from the ground up around their legs, anchoring them in place. "They're still alive," Wright said quietly. "Their life signs are stable, but they're not responding to any stimuli." Frank approached carefully, keeping his distance, from the crystal perimeter. One of the trapped rangers, Sergeant Patricia Ellis, slowly turned her head to look at him. Her eyes had the same vacant blue glow he had seen in the Horizon's crew. "Frank Donovan," she said, her voice oddly flat. "We understand now." Frank kept his voice calm. "Understand what, Patricia?" "This world. Its purpose. The Rangers are not meant to leave. You are not meant to leave." "That's not going to happen," Frank said firmly. "We're getting everyone out of here." Patricia's expression didn't change. "The knowledge cannot leave. It would destroy everything." Before Frank could respond, a blinding flash of light erupted from the crystal formation. When his vision cleared, 3rd Squad and the entire crystal structure had vanished, leaving only a smooth depression in the ground. "What just happened?" Wright asked, her voice shaking. "Where did they go?" Frank had no answer. He ordered everyone back to the main group immediately. By nightfall, they had reached a plateau that offered some protection, steep cliffs on 3 sides and a narrow approach that could be easily defended. Frank ordered the camp established there, though few rangers would be sleeping. "We've lost contact with Pathfinder 2's team," Grace reported as they set up the perimeter. "And 4 more rangers have reported seeing or hearing things that aren't there. Dr. Richards thinks the crystals might be affecting our minds somehow." Frank nodded grimly. "How many left?" 84. "Counting us," Grace replied. "And the data cores are degrading. The crystal growths are spreading, despite our attempts to contain them." Frank looked out over the darkening landscape. The massive creature that had been following them had stopped at the base of the plateau, motionless now but still watching. In the distance, the crystal fields glowed brighter than ever, pulsing in complex patterns. "I need to see those data cores," Frank said. In the makeshift lab tent, Corporal Hall showed Frank the 2 recovered data units. Crystal growths now covered nearly half their surfaces, glowing with the familiar blue light. "We've downloaded about 60% of the data," Hall explained. But it's highly technical. Theoretical physics mostly. Dr. Richards is the only one who might understand it. Frank called Richards over. Make sense of this. What did they find that's so important? The planet doesn't want us to have it? Richards spent an hour reviewing the data while Frank organized the night's defenses. When the scientist finally emerged from the lab tent, his expression was one of wonder and fear. Major, this is beyond revolutionary, Richards said quietly. The Horizon team discovered that space-time isn't what we thought. The crystals don't just store information, they exist partially outside normal space-time. They're a natural quantum computer that can process reality itself. What does that mean in practical terms? Frank asked. It means whoever controls this technology could literally rewrite the laws of physics within a limited area, create or destroy matter, generate infinite energy, maybe even travel instantaneously across the galaxy without wormholes. Frank understood now why the Confederation wanted this data so badly, and why the planet was trying to stop them from taking it. Such power would change everything. Their conversation was interrupted by a massive electromagnetic pulse that swept across the camp, disabling most of their equipment. In the sudden darkness, crystal formations began growing at the edges of the plateau, advancing slowly toward the Rangers' position. Everyone to the center of the camp, Frank ordered. Defensive. Circle. As the Rangers scrambled to regroup, the ground beneath them began to vibrate, not like an earthquake, but in a precise pattern, almost like a language. Private Cooper looked up from a device he had been protecting from the pulse. Sir, I think it's trying to communicate with us directly. Can you understand it? Frank asked. Cooper shook his head. Not exactly, but I think I can establish a rudimentary interface using the patterns we've recorded. Frank made a decision. Do it. Maybe we can reason with it. As Cooper worked, the crystals continued their advance, now just yards from the Rangers' position. The night around them had come alive with sound, clicks, hums, and strange whispers that seemed to come from inside their own heads. Frank looked at the faces of his remaining soldiers. They were exhausted, afraid, but still determined. They had come too far to give up now. Hold position, he ordered. Whatever happens next, we face it together. In the center of their circle, Cooper's device began to glow with the same blue light as the crystals. A connection had been made. Cooper's device hummed louder, the blue glow spreading outward in rippling waves. The advancing crystal formations stopped their progress, pulsing in sync with the device. A moment of perfect stillness fell over the plateau. Then a voice spoke. Not from any one direction, but seemingly from everywhere at once. It sounded like thousands of voices speaking as one, yet somehow remaining distinct. Why do you come to take what is not yours? The voice asked. Frank stepped forward. We came to recover data from our crashed ship. We didn't know the nature of this world. Deception, the voice replied. Your kind always seeks power. The knowledge within the crystals is not for you. The Rangers stood in tense silence, weapons ready but unsure what they would even fire at. How do you fight a planet? The planet is afraid, Cooper said quietly to Frank. It's afraid of what we'll do with the knowledge. Frank considered this. Can you show it our intentions, make it understand we're not a threat? Cooper hesitated. Maybe, but it would require direct interface. Someone would need to connect with the crystal network. Grace shook her head. You saw what happened to the Horizon crew, and to Third Squad. We don't have a choice, Frank said. We're running out of options. Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the plateau, glowing blue light shining up from within. Several Rangers lost their footing, falling to the ground. The plateau is breaking apart, Grace shouted. We need to move. Frank made his decision. Grace, take half the Rangers and head for the extraction point. Take the data cores with you. I'll stay here with a volunteer team and try to buy you time. Grace stared at him. That's suicide, Frank. That's an order, Lieutenant. Frank's voice was firm. Someone has to make it off this planet. Grace knew better than to argue. She quickly organized the evacuation team. selecting the strongest remaining Rangers to make the 2-day journey to the extraction point. The data cores were carefully packed and distributed between 3 soldiers to ensure redundancy. As they prepared to leave, Frank pulled Grace aside. "If you make it back, tell them the truth about this place. It's not just a resource to be exploited. It's alive and aware. They need to understand that." Grace nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She squeezed his arm once, then turned to lead her team down the narrow path off the plateau. Frank watched them go, then turned to his remaining team, 41 Rangers who had volunteered to stay behind. Among them was Private Cooper, who was still working with his communication device. "Sir, I think I've found a way to establish a more stable connection," Cooper said, "but it will require using the energy core from one of our dropships. We'd need to overload it in a very specific way." "Explain," Frank said. "The crystal network operates on quantum principles we barely understand, but if we generate a massive energy surge tuned to the right frequency, we might be able to communicate directly with the planetary consciousness." "And what happens to whoever is doing the communicating?" Frank asked, though he already knew the answer. Cooper met his gaze steadily. "They would become part of the network, permanently." Around them, the plateau continued to break apart. Crystal formations were now erupting all around their position, growing larger by the minute. The strange mountain-like creature had begun climbing the cliff face, moving with surprising speed for something so massive. "How long will it take to set up?" Frank asked. 20 minutes, maybe less," Cooper replied. "Do it." The Rangers worked quickly, salvaging parts from their equipment to build Cooper's device. The young private worked with intense focus, his hands steady despite the chaos around them. As they worked, more of the strange predators from their first night appeared, circling their position but not attacking. They seemed to be waiting for something. "It's almost ready," Cooper said finally. "But someone needs to activate it from inside the crystal formation. The signal won't be strong enough otherwise." Frank nodded. "I'll do it." "No, sir," Cooper said. "It has to be me. The device is calibrated to my neural patterns now. Anyone else would just burn out." Frank wanted to argue, but there was no time. The plateau was now more crystal than stone, and several Rangers had already been cut off from the main group by fast-growing formations. "Do it!" Frank ordered again. "The rest of us will hold them off as long as we can." Cooper took a deep breath and stepped toward the largest crystal formation. As he approached, the crystals seemed to reach out toward him, growing in his direction. "Private," Frank called. Cooper turned back. "Make them understand. Make them see we can coexist." Cooper nodded, then pressed forward. The crystals parted before him, creating a path into their center. He walked in without hesitation, the device clutched. In his hands for a moment nothing happened. Then a blinding flash of blue light erupted from the crystal formation, expanding outward in a shockwave that knocked Frank and the other Rangers to the ground. When Frank could see again, the landscape had changed. The crystals were no longer advancing. The predators had retreated. Even the mountain-like creature had stopped its climb and remained motionless on the cliff face. Frank struggled to his feet, looking for Cooper. Where the private had entered the crystal formation, a new structure now stood, a perfect sphere of blue crystal that pulsed with gentle light. "Cooper," Frank called. A voice answered. Cooper's voice, but somehow different, layered with other sounds. "I understand now, Major," the voice said. "And it understands us. We've reached an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" Frank asked. "The knowledge stays here, but not locked away. Researchers can come, a few at a time, with respect and care. The planet will share what it knows, but on its terms. No exploitation, no weapons." Frank approached the crystal sphere cautiously. "And you? What about you, Cooper?" "I'm part of it now. But still me. It's hard to explain. I can see so much, Major. The entire planet, every life form, every crystal. They're all connected, all aware in different ways." A tremor ran through the ground again, but gentler this time, almost like a sigh. "You should go now," Cooper's voice said. The others will reach the extraction point by tomorrow. I've asked the planet to let you join them. We're not leaving you behind, Frank insisted. You have to. I'm not just Cooper anymore. I'm part of Tartarus now, its ambassador to humanity. Before Frank could argue further, crystal paths began forming across the broken plateau, creating clear routes toward the extraction point. The remaining rangers looked to Frank for direction. Go, Cooper's voice said. Tell them what you've seen here. Tell them to come back, but with open minds and peaceful intentions. Frank hesitated, then nodded. We'll come back for you. I know, I'll be waiting, all of us will. Frank led the remaining rangers along the crystal path. None of the planet's creatures bothered them as they traveled. It was as if a truce had been declared. 6 weeks later, a Confederation retrieval vessel approached Tartarus cautiously. Their scans detected a single human life sign where the extraction beacon had been activated. On the surface, they found only Private Alan Cooper, sitting calmly among a circle of crystal formations. The Mirror retrieval team approached carefully, weapons ready, but Cooper showed no signs of hostility. He looked the same as when he'd left, except for faint crystalline patterns visible beneath his skin. Where are the others? The team leader asked. Cooper smiled gently. They're part of Tartarus now. And I'm part of them. Aboard the retrieval ship, Cooper explained everything. How Major Donovan had sacrificed himself to establish the first true connection with Tartarus, how the planet had accepted him, and through him, come to understand humanity. The other Rangers had joined one by one, becoming part of the vast consciousness that was Tartarus. Why did they let you go? The Confederation Admiral asked suspiciously. I'm not gone, Cooper replied. I'm still connected to them. I'm the bridge between our worlds now. They sent me back to deliver a message. The Admiral's four eyes narrowed. What message? That Tartarus will share its knowledge, but only with those who come to learn, not to take. The planet isn't a resource to be mined. It's a teacher. When the Confederation Science Council examined Cooper, they found his body was changing at the cellular level. The crystalline patterns beneath his skin were growing slowly, integrating with his nervous system, yet his mind remained his own, expanded rather than consumed. Cooper demonstrated abilities that defied the Confederation's understanding of physics. He could communicate across vast distances without technology. He could manipulate energy fields with a thought. And he carried within him knowledge that could transform their understanding of the universe. 1 year later, Cooper returned to Tartarus with a new team, volunteers who understood the risks and the potential rewards. As they prepared to descend to the surface, a young alien scientist asked him how humans could adapt to such a hostile world. Cooper smiled, the crystalline patterns beneath his skin glowing gently in the dim light of the ship. As their ship touched down on the surface of Tartarus, the crystal fields pulsed in welcome. And somewhere within the vast consciousness of the planet, Frank Donovan, Grace Howard, and nearly 200 Rangers waited to greet them. Changed forever, but still fundamentally human in the ways that mattered most. The Deathworld had not defeated humanity.